record. Okay, good morning and welcome to Keep Middlesex Moving's podcast series. I am Christina Fowler, your host. For those of you not familiar with KMM, we are the Transportation Management Association for Middlesex County. We work with employers, local and state government agencies to promote programs aimed at traffic mitigation, sustainability, and economic development. To learn more about us, please visit us at kmm.org or shoot me an email. Before we begin today's webinar, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping details. At the end of our podcast, we will be taking questions. To ask a question, please use the Q&A features on your screen. This webinar will be recorded and can be sent to you along with the presentations later at your request. Before we begin, let me introduce you to Roberta Karpenitz, our director.
Welcome to our podcast commemorating International Women's Day. International Women's Day celebrates women's achievements. It raises awareness about women's equality and lobbies for gender parity. If we look at a study from the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University, we learned that women comprise only 15% of the transportation workforce. We'll talk about that a little bit later and figure out why we need to get that percentage up. But right now, I want to introduce two accomplished women who are part of that 15%. My guests today are the NJDOT Commissioner, Diane Gutierrez-Scaccetti, and Zenobia Fields, who is a Senior Policy and Program Advisor at DOT. Zenobia is also the president of the newly ratified New Jersey chapter of the Women's Transportation Seminars, which is committed to expanding the number of women in the field. Good morning, and let's get started. Commissioner, when I talk to people about DOT, it seems there are four categories: roads, bridges, snow removal, and potholes. They're all very important, but not by far the only areas of concentration in the department. So I wonder if you'd talk to us a little bit, give us a primer on DOT, and then tell us about your role.
Thanks, Roberta. And you're right. When people think of the DOT, those are probably the four top categories. And the first two, roads and bridges, are probably because most of the time that's where you see articles where we're getting graded on the condition of our roads and the condition of our bridges. After February, nothing more to say about snow. And certainly now that we've just launched our pothole campaign for the spring, you'll see us out there regularly. But DOTs are so much more than that. I think when we think about DOTs, we only think about surface transportation, but we maintain a large maritime division, large in its reach, small in its number of staff, but that work on many projects that are important to our waterways, like dredging. Even looking at the new Port of Paulsboro project, it'll be the DOT that helps fund the dredging that gets done there, that allows vessels to come in and help us develop wind energy as part of a line of business in New Jersey. Aviation, helping to manage all the small airports that we have throughout the state. We don't own many, they're small, but we have an aviation group that is focused on nothing but that. We have a group that works on drones. Drone and unmanned aircraft is relatively new, but something that we really use here as a tool to help us do our job. So we have a group that focuses on how we use that technology. We have our safety and mobility group that look at the newest technologies we can use to make our roads safer. And they work in conjunction with our traffic engineering group, who, if any of you have been to Princeton lately, have seen the new crosswalk. Well, it's not new anymore, but I guess at Washington Road and Nassau Street, that Zenobia, what do you call it? You call it a full phase walk?
Yeah, full phase, all phase walk, yes.
Yep. So if you go to Princeton and happen to be in your car at the light at Washington and Nassau Street, you have an all phase walk, which means all pedestrians walk at the same time. And then the cars go and all pedestrians are asked to wait. What does that do? Well, certainly it allows people to do what they love most, which is to cross on the diagonal, if they so choose. But it keeps cars from moving when people are trying to cross the parallel roadway. And so there's not cars waiting to make right turns while people are crossing. There's not that constant debate. We employ a lot of safety technology like that. And when a town has an issue, even a small town, with a small issue, the DOT still goes out and makes sure that it assists in trying to solve that problem. We have what I like to call our quick fix group. And Zenobia would know from our work in Lambertville, a problem that plagued Lambertville for probably better than a decade of creating better pedestrian access to the shopping area, that we just couldn't figure out the big solution to. It didn't need a big solution, it needed a little solution. And so the DOT also works very hard with our local communities, not only through funding of our grant programs, which most people are familiar with, our county aid, our municipal aid, our bike ped grants, our rail freight grants. We have lots and lots of opportunities for communities to advance their own individual programs through our grant program, which is about $430 million a year. But we also assist with technical advice. We stood up in our local aid group, a local aid resource center, where communities who want to understand how to apply for a grant or to do better in their applications, maybe where they've been unsuccessful, can improve that opportunity. So I think we've done a great deal of work. It's a big agency. DOTs are considered battleships that move slowly, but we try to kind of assist with those speedboats in our local communities that can move a little faster to make sure that they're getting what they need and make sure everybody travels as safely as possible, whether by foot, on bike, in a car or bus, or on rail, that our transportation system overall is safe.
I know that one of the programs we work with DOT on is the Safe Routes to School program.
Mhm.
We have specifically on our staff a young man who's the Safe Routes to School coordinator. And as I'm sure you can imagine, that's a hands-on person-to-person program. It's been a little tough this year, but I have to say, Chris has done some remarkable things with Zoom and video, and he puts together educational Facebook posts. I think his son, his 2-year-old, is going to be up for an Academy Award, because anytime he needs a child, his son is there to participate. So we do appreciate your support of the Safe Routes to School program and the other programs that we're involved with. Zenobia, I really wanted to talk with you and learn a lot more about the Women in Transportation seminars. I became aware of that when I began researching this program, and as you may know, I sent an email to the general info email asking if someone would be interested in speaking with us, and the message came back, "Oh, I'll send this to our president, Zenobia." And I said, "Could that be Zenobia Fields?" "Oh, yes." So this is wonderful. I'm glad to have you with us today. And would you talk about the organization?
Yeah, thank you, Roberta. So we're happy. We are in our inaugural year, and thanks to the commissioner and having the vision for having a New Jersey chapter, we became one of 64 chapters. We are the 63rd chapter, so we're a part of over 8,000 other members internationally. So, and it gives the opportunity to open up resources for the chapter. I know the commissioner really wanted to open up resources for women in New Jersey to have something where, of course, we can travel to New York and to Philadelphia, but when we're looking for resources in terms of networking, in terms of mentorship, actually being able to do outreach to youth, whether we're talking about our high school outreach with our Transportation U, our STEM program, or doing our college outreach, really exposing students to what's out there in the transportation field. And we're talking about all careers. I know you've had a long career, Roberta, and it's not just looking at whether I'm a planner and an architect, or if you're an engineer or administrator in finance and operations, but really letting people know what's out there in terms of transportation. And being able to talk to someone that looks like you, that can encourage you and help you develop your career development goals going in the fields and beyond. I mean, one of the ways that I met the commissioner was through a WTS event. Actually, it was a CompTIL event almost 3 years ago today. I don't know if you remember that, but we were celebrating Women's History Month again. And it's just an example of where you get to meet people, where you get to glean some of their experience and knowledge, and you're supported. And I think that's the big thing. And Commissioner, please add to what we were thinking in the mission, but you want to attract, maintain, and make sure you're creating opportunities for the advancement of women in transportation. And with the New Jersey chapter, you just made that opportunity localized.
Yeah, I think too, Roberta, the important part was, as Zenobia said, we have the New York chapter and the Philadelphia chapter, which we were able to belong to. It's not that our women couldn't participate. I think part of the problem was, and somewhat like we're seeing in the midst of the pandemic, it was hard for women to travel to events in New York or in Philadelphia because the travel time on its own was significant. And we know that moms are the relied upon resource for children. So mothers with young children who were also seeking professional development could not maybe give a half a day or into an evening to go to an event. So having a chapter in New Jersey, we're a pretty small state. We can move around. We're a little agile that way. And we thought it would really just kind of complement Philadelphia and New York in terms of us being able to do some smaller work. I think the really interesting thing about WTS, though, is the number of members who are men. So I think the good part is, I think that people are beginning to realize the value of women in all professional fields. I think Zenobia says it right. In transportation, we're not just engineers. We are from a variety of different professional backgrounds and trade backgrounds. And so understanding the value that women will bring to your organization is really reflected to me in the fact that large firms, obviously we're in a male-dominated field, but those who come to our WTS events because they know there's really good talent there, right? Like Zenobia is really, I could see the day I met Zenobia was going to be phenomenal talent, and she is. She represents the department so well. She does good work for us in our local aid group, in our planning group with Mike Russo and his team. And she knows her business, right? She could go to New York and Philadelphia and that was great, but she's a New Jersey gem, right? And so we want to make sure that we give those folks that opportunity to be here in New Jersey and to blossom in New Jersey. And so that was really a large part of why I thought WTS needed its own chapter here.
I think it's a great idea. I want to just talk for a minute about the when we say transportation isn't just engineers, it isn't just planners, because I think that's important. In my own experience, when I was growing up, I never said, I can't wait to get into transportation demand management. I mean, at that time in the olden days, nobody even knew what that was. And so I literally got my job through a friend of a friend. And so my introduction to TDM was just quite serendipitous. And, here I am 30 years later, but I look at my staff and I think that none of the women on my staff expected to be in transportation demand management either, but their skills were broad and their skills are very important to supporting the program. So I think the Women in Transportation seminars, that's a way for other women to see you don't have to be an engineer, you don't have to be a planner. But I wonder just if you could tell us what, Commissioner, what path led you to become the Commissioner of Transportation? Because probably as a young girl, you didn't say, oh, I can't wait to be the Commissioner of Transportation. So
no, I was going to sing on Broadway.
Oh, well, there
now
you
I just sing in the car.
Okay.
I like to say, I said this to somebody the other day, I kind of tripped and fell into transportation. It wasn't on my radar as when I finished at the University of Connecticut, something I said, I'm going to go out and go apply to, work in transportation. Mm-hmm. I really liked human resources. I liked collective bargaining. I said, I really want to work someplace where I can kind of get into the HR field. And I started at Mercer County, the county government, working in their affirmative action office. And it was interesting because when I think about it, even then I was doing work to help certify disadvantaged businesses to get public works contracts. Like how weird is that, right? I'd never thought of it. And I said, well, I kind of been in this business a little bit, I guess, from the beginning. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I had the opportunity to go over and work in the Department of Treasury for a person I had interviewed with early in Tom Kane's administration. There was a hiring freeze, and he remembered me 2 years later and said, you'll come over here and work for me. And it was great because I learned a ton about the legislative process, right? And so that's very important in my job. But from there, he went to be head of the General Services Administration that existed at the time. And I went with him. And again, learned the procurement process, learned how the Division of Building and Construction worked, learned how the core of government processes worked. But I was going to graduate school. So the important part of this, I was going to graduate school. I was at Rutgers at the Institute of Management and Labor Relations, still pursuing my desire to negotiate labor contracts for some reason. I did it, left government, went to IBM, worked down there, worked in North Carolina for a couple of years, and then wanted to come home and start a family and be close to my family. And the same person who I worked for was working at the New Jersey Turnpike Authority. And he said, why don't you come and work for me? I said, doing what? He goes, well, work in human resources. I said, okay, that sounds like a plan. So I did. And who would have thought that 21 years later, I would have still been there, actually sitting at the desk he sat at when he hired me. And again, he was a very progressive thinker. He didn't have any ceiling on what women could do, which I think was so phenomenal for me. He allowed me to do the work I wanted to. And so when I got to the Turnpike, I finally got to negotiate my labor contracts for many, many years, but learned so many other things. I learned about bond financing projects, learned about developing capital plans, learned about how service areas have to be run. And so just the fact, I have to say, my first 6 months, I thought I was going to die because I was like, who wants to talk about concrete and blacktop all day? But once I opened my mind, and that's the key of what I'm saying, I opened my mind to understand the depth and breadth of transportation, that you could do almost anything, then to me, it became a very simple decision to immerse myself in it. And that's what I did, and worked my way through the process, through lots of hoops, not a straight path at all. So be clear, no straight paths here, but continued on and became the executive director of the Turnpike in 2008. And so 2010, we had a change of administration. That's a risk you take when you're in those positions. But honestly, all things work in my world, all things work to the good of what God intends for us. And so going to Florida to run Florida's Turnpike was probably the most educational and preparatory piece of the seat I sit in now. So I went from a Turnpike that was standalone to a Turnpike that is embedded in a Department of Transportation, working under a DOT secretary, to being the DOT commissioner in New Jersey. And so I look at all those experiences as the building blocks that landed me here. But the key was applying myself, not waiting for anybody to open a door, not waiting for somebody to pick me, was always volunteering, always being ready to try, always, no matter what it was, if it was something I knew or something I didn't know, just really pushing myself forward and, kind of raising my hand and say, I'll help, I'll do it, so that I could learn and ask questions, right? And I've never been shy about asking questions. I'm still not, because I learn every day. So that really, to me, was how I kind of, I landed in this chair, as just years of following a path, crooked as it may have been, dark as it may have been, sometimes tough as it may have been, with a lot of folks around me who were willing to support me through it. From, like I say, my very first boss, Jim Kennedy, to Frank McDermott, who was chair of the Turnpike Authority, who really pushed me forward, to Governor Murphy, allowing me to be in this position.
It is often a circuitous route, and one that you're right, you have to kind of navigate all along the way. Zenobia, what was your experience?
I did not start in transportation either. I actually started out as an architect. So I went to school in upstate New York, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and I did architecture up there. I worked up there. It's near the Albany area as an architect for a while. Then as I was working for an architect, I wanted to understand, well, what influences decision making, not really understanding, well, you're looking at policy and getting more involved with social policy. So I went on to urban planning. I thought I was going to do international development. I got a call from a HUD representative saying, well, if you switch to community development, we'll pay for it. So I said, okay. And I went on to study community development down at Virginia Tech. And then from there, I actually went into the private sector. So in the Washington, D.C. area, I worked for Michael Baker. We had federal contracts. We did asset planning there. And it still all had to do with, I think transportation really ties everything together. You don't quite know when you come out of high school how to articulate, hey, I'm interested in this. But if you're interested in responding to people's needs and access to opportunity, you eventually get there somehow, because transportation is at the root of a lot of things. But after I was down in the private sector for about 3 years, and I'm originally from New Jersey. I was born in New Jersey. I wanted to come back to my family. This is the same way. So I came back to New Jersey and I worked for a nonprofit. And the nonprofit really gave an opportunity to look at a variety of different things, including housing, transportation, land use. When I was working for the nonprofit, I also worked with an MPO. I had no idea what an MPO was beyond when I was doing my master's thesis in graduate school, looking at, well, what do you do for community economic development? It was funny back then, I found the Job Access Reverse Commute Grant Program. And NJTPA was actually one of the examples that I used there. I didn't know before I came back to New Jersey, I would end up working for NJTPA for almost 12 years. But it is funny how things tie together. When I joined NJTPA, I actually joined as a GIS specialist because I was a numbers person interested in analysis and using it as a tool. I was fortunate during my time at NJTPA that we had about 3 to 6 months after I was there, a new executive director come in. It was a woman, it was Mary Kay Murphy. And I had opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation because she wanted to talk with each of the employees. And I explained to her that I just didn't want to do GIS, that I wanted to be, looked at it as a tool. I wanted to be exposed to a lot of different things in planning and what made me interested in planning and transportation and what we could do with that. Now that meeting, I've pointed out, it took a while, but she remembered that meeting. And during that meeting, 3 years later, I was promoted to manager, then director, then department director. So those conversations mean something. And when you're trying to find out where you want to go, make sure that you're putting your foot forward on what you're interested in, how you want to. I was a GIS specialist, but moving over from my systems planning background to going into regional planning and then creating a larger department that really looked at integrated planning and gave us opportunity while I was there to get back into a larger sustainable development. So combining it with economic development, being able to work with the TMAs while I was there, that transition. So it was very interesting how it evolved. And then about 3 years ago, all of a sudden, there's a change in commissioner. I didn't think about things like that, but I made sure that one of the interests I have in terms of what the commissioner was saying was making sure you're learning and exposed. Everything I'm interested in, whether it's ITS, whether you're looking at environmental development, whether you're looking at economic development, I go to all those different events and make sure that I walk around, I meet people. And that's where I kept running into the commissioner. We had our WTS events. Hey, would you speak about this? We want to talk about innovation. Can you meet us and speak about this? There's always this different nexus of things that are happening that you can be exposed to that you may not be able to articulate because you haven't been exposed to yet what you're interested in your career development, but making sure that you are keeping your eyes open and you're talking to people and you're asking questions. And that's how I ended up at DOT. So, well, what are you all doing? How are you evolving here? And this is the opportunity to learn from a female commissioner. So, okay, let's try this for a while. I definitely didn't see myself coming over to be the director of government and community relations or being a policy advisor. But it was interesting because it's okay, this is a conversation where you mentioned the legislature, but bringing in like, well, how decisions are made, how you're making the decisions that are informing our programs and how we're spending those $2 billion that are coming to this state. So it all evolves. So I don't want to go on too long, but that's
I think this is an exciting conversation because there are young women out there thinking, oh, I could never do this, I could never do that. But if you have a skill set and if you keep your mind open to various ideas, you can chart a path. So I think I really appreciate the two of you sharing your experiences. But now I'd like to talk a little bit about why do we need more women in transportation? 15% of the transportation workforce being women is pretty sad. And I wonder, well, let's first talk about why do we need more women in transportation. Talking to Christina before we came on this morning, she said she had to take her son to school before her day started. And it reminded me of a synopsis of a study that I read about Bogota, Colombia. And it was looking at how women experience transportation differently than men. And one of the points that they made was women have different peak travel periods than men do. And Christina proved it. Her peak period, if she were going to the office, her peak period would have started earlier because she had to take her son to school. So I think from my point of view, we need more women in transportation because their experiences are different. But what would each of you have to say about that?
Well, I think for me, and Zenobia's heard me say this before, we all bring different gifts to the table in terms of what our views are, in terms of how we see things. And since we're on all part of the Zenobia fan club, one of the things I think people should take away from what Zenobia just said is Zenobia did a lot on her own to expose herself and learn about a variety of different topics in transportation. Her MPO background combined with her DOT background is a very valuable skill set. But it's Zenobia pushing herself. Zenobia waits for no one, right? Zenobia sees something, she pursues it, she wants to learn about it. And that's how we have to be as women to get into this field. But I think what you said, Roberta, is true. Women do use the transportation network differently because our roles are different. We still carry some of what have been traditional roles for decades, right? So Christina takes her child to school. Is that a shared responsibility? I don't know. It doesn't really matter for Christina's particular case, but my sense is that women use the transportation system because they are maybe going to work, but if not, they're working at home and they may need to they may be caregivers to elderly folks. They may be run groceries to shut-in neighbors. Women have an empathetic side of them that is somewhat different because it's just the way we've been nurtured, right? And there's nothing, by the way, nothing wrong with that. It's good. And don't change it. Like, don't try to be somebody you're not. You have to do and be what comes natural to you. And so I think women, especially when we start talking about our smaller pieces of the transportation network, women are key to they understand their community development better. They advocate differently. I think about the mayor of Highland Park, who's an extraordinary advocate for her town. She never rests, right? I'm going to go fix those potholes on Route 27 going through Highland Park if it's the last thing we do this week. But at the end of the day, women see their communities differently. And yes, they understand the business. I will go up against any gentleman who wants to sit and debate a good bond issue with me. But I will also sit next to a mother who has a child who can't cross 206 and be as empathetic to that situation as I will be to needing to raise money, as Zenobia said, our $2 billion to go out and do the work that it is we do to build our roads and bridges. And I think women should embrace that. Because as they're developing projects and designing projects, especially in this new administration, those sensitivities are going to be more important, whether it's climate change issues, whether it's rural community transportation, whether it's access link and transportation for the underserved. We're going to have to develop sensitivities that some people just, I don't know if they don't get it. And I'm not just saying that about men or women. It's a lot of people that don't get it. So I think we are going to need to try to balance the 15% out. It's a tough field. And it could be that we only have 15% in because we have formidable teammates. But I encourage, and Zenobia knows this, and I sometimes the folks here get a little annoyed with me. I encourage and challenge many of my male counterparts who are at events that I speak with to bring one woman from their staff to every event. Because as much as I like seeing all of them, I could see a room of 300 people and 5 of them are women. So I challenge them, even if it's a young person who's maybe not ready to go out and network at these big events, just expose them to it. Let them understand what it is that happens outside of their 4 walls. Give them the energy and desire to pursue those higher goals so they can go to those networking events and bring somebody with them, male or female, I don't care. But the point is, if you don't let people know what's out there, see, Zenobia and I were both alike in the terms that we pursue. We're assertive in that regard. We don't sit down quietly all the time. And that's always a good, that can be a good thing. You have to be careful with it, but it can be a good thing. We need people to advocate for some of these young women and open their eyes to just all of the opportunities that there are for women in this field, whether it be in bond finance, whether it be in HR, whether it be in the hard sciences of engineering and architecture, and environmental. All of those have plenty of opportunity for women. The transportation network is going to be our future, whether it's by electric vehicle or not. We still need pavement, right? Commercial trucks, trains and drones cannot move everything. Every product at some point or another is on a truck going someplace. And so we need to keep that transportation system going. And so the other thing I would say to young women about this is a career that has staying power. They tell men in a recession, men always buy ties, but they may not buy new suits because it's a recession and they're balancing their books, right? And in a strong economic period, they buy new suits, but then they'll always buy a new tie. So the tie business is a really good business to be in. Well, I'd argue the same thing about transportation. Recession or strong economic times, transportation is still a hugely stable part of our government, right? We have to continue to deliver transportation. We have to allow people to get where they need to go. So in that regard, I would also suggest to people that in good times and bad, this isn't such a bad career to pick.
Well, it certainly is a broad category for people to become involved with. Zenobia, do you have any thoughts on this? I'm sure you do. Of course you have thoughts on it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think just to echo some of the things the commissioner is saying, I think one of the greatest things about transportation is that you really have to acknowledge all the different qualities of life, no matter what you subscribe to. I think in terms of having women in the field, the perspective that they bring is that when you're thinking about how you get through your day to day, the commissioner mentioned whether you have to take your child to school. And this goes back to one of the things where you think about what do you like about your work in transportation, not necessarily the job, but what do you like about your work? And it's really responding to the needs. I remember we were doing something and it was actually a Safe Routes to School program, and we went to an elementary school. And I met a principal, and she still impressed me to this day, like one of the best leaders I've ever met, because there was a room of about 400 students. She knew every name, and the way she captured their attention and the way she led with care. But one of the things she said was, well, I have parents that they live in Newark and their child lives here in this neighborhood when they're going to elementary school, but they live in a completely different ward to go to high school. So how do they get back and forth between that? And thinking about, well, what could we do working with New Jersey Transit and a shuttle program? Then that same day, having a conversation with Panasonic, thinking about, well, what are we going to do about making sure that we have charging stations or working with electric vehicles. And I bring that up because one, I was speaking to a principal. She was a female principal, thinking about the needs of a mother getting her child to school, and then she had to go to work. Then the vice president of strategic initiatives over at Panasonic, she was also a female woman. She was thinking about, well, what am I going to do when I'm traveling back and forth to the different headquarters? Hers happened to be in Japan. But just the spectrum of the things you have to think about, where you're having conversations with people that I just need to survive the day to day, to someone's thinking about how we're getting in that innovation, that inventive world. I think transportation brings so many different perspectives to the table that you have to think about, whether we're talking about our underserved or disadvantaged communities, to whether we're talking about Eli Musk. I mean, Eli Musk working with places like Port Authority right now, he's thinking about the Hyperloop, but that's all transportation too. There's just such a wide spectrum. And I do think women, we hold a lot of different perspectives naturally there. And then transportation is just a playing field where you can see a lot of those different perspectives play out.
So I think we're going to end up, unfortunately, wrapping up. It's been a dynamic conversation. So I think what I'd like some final words. If you were giving a young woman advice today, I think we've covered a lot of it, but what would you do? What one piece of advice would you give her to encourage her to pursue a career in transportation? Zenobia or Commissioner?
I think my first piece of advice would be to pursue an internship. If you have that opportunity through your college, even through a summer job, see if you can find an organization, and we don't do a lot of it at DOT, but we do some. Find a place where you could learn what transportation means. Like, what is it, right? It's like Zenobia said, it's this very big thing, and you have to break it down into smaller pieces, right? You have to kind of, I don't know how many of you have small children that are on this, but I had to buy a gift for a friend of mine's daughter, and they have these things called LOL surprise. I don't know, you go to the store, and honestly, I have no idea what it is, but you're supposed to buy it. But I still don't know today what it is. It's this thing. And I guess until you open it, you don't really know what's in it. right? Or something like it, along those lines. Well, transportation's like that. It's this big thing. And until you open it and really kind of look at it inside, it's really hard to understand how much you have to choose from. And whether it's with an engineering firm, whether it's with, and I don't care if you go to the engineering firm to be the receptionist, by the way, find a place where you are in the atmosphere where you can hear and learn. And when you do, please take time to learn the whole business that you're in. And that's something I talk about at DOT a lot. It's okay if you work over in outdoor advertising and you do your work with permitting billboards or whatever, but you should have a broad knowledge of what else is happening at DOT. Well, we have a capital plan and it's $1.3 billion. It's the largest one we ever had. I mean, you don't have to list all the projects in it, but know enough about your business that you have the opportunity to really understand what goes on every day. And if you take that and you have to be a little assertive, you're going to have to ask, can I sit down on this meeting, or is there anything I could be reading while I'm sitting here to help me learn a couple of annual reports? Be a little assertive, but as a young person breaking into the field, I would say that. Then I would secondly say, if you're kind of graduating college and you want to make your way, organizations like AASHTO, like WTS, like IBTTA, like the I-9, it's now the Eastern Quarter Coalition, where you might be able to volunteer and start to meet people and see the depth and breadth of what our associations do that we all belong to. First of all, it's a great networking opportunity, but it is also a phenomenal learning opportunity. In all this Zoom that we do, the Transportation Research Board, which is part of the National Academy of the Sciences, has a huge annual meeting every January. Zenobia will tell you, like, the thing is massive. 13,000 people attend. It goes on for days. Well, they couldn't do it because they couldn't converge 13,000 people in Washington. So they did the entire thing virtually, which in and of itself was phenomenal as far as I was concerned. 13,000 people didn't attend them. 20,000 people did.
Wow.
Because they had the access. So ask about those things. Ask about, we're going to be in a hybrid situation, I think, for quite some time, if not maybe forever. Ask about attending. Ask about, having the opportunity to go and be part of these Zoom meetings and these Zoom webinars, just like you're having this morning, right? And see what it would take for you to start to network into the businesses of transportation. It's not easy, but as we say, I know Zenobia and I both say it, when you get a little down, pick up a phone and call one of us, because we're all going to cheer you on. We're all going to applaud you and say, you go, keep going, right? That's what we do. And we want young women to feel like they have the resources. My title is commissioner, but my favorite title is actually mom. So I know, and I want to see so many young people be successful. So we want them to know they have an open door to us to help encourage them and, pick them up when they maybe feel like they've kind of hit a wall.
Zenobia, you
I mean,
add?
I think they covered a lot of it.
I know.
But what I would also say is the importance of mentorship, because I think she hit on it. I think one of the things that we have is that we try to engage with our high school students with transportation use. So, and it works both ways. I definitely, when you're having that hard day, and I'm sure the commissioner can agree to this, one of the greatest things is talking to a high school student. It lifts you right up, because you're like, okay, well, I'm dealing with this problem here, but can I inspire them for that next step? Or if you have a colleague, it could be peer mentorship. Or if you need to speak with your mentor itself. I think in getting in transportation or in any of the career development fields, I always talk to people. I said, well, can I have coffee? Can I have breakfast with you? And ask them questions, pick their brain. And don't be afraid to ask the question, well, what do you do and how did you decide when it was time to move from this place or when to explore this career? And I never did, and I think early on being exposed to, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself to say, I'm an engineer, I may only be looking at a bridging engineer, or I'm a water resource engineer, but what else is out there? And I think you only understand that by being able to ask questions of people that may have the job that you don't even know that you want. So I think it's very important to take advantage of mentorship opportunities both ways, being a mentor and a mentee.
Great advice. Great advice. I hope there's some young women who are listening and will take it. Christina, do we have any questions?
I have one question that was somewhat answered, but I will read it. Zenobia is indeed a gem, a New Jersey gem. This is from Winifred Victor Hines. Her question is, can you expound on the specific types of opportunities and resources, including educational, available for women of color who may be interested in a career in transportation? Where do you recommend they start? So we have, for the most part, answered that question, but if you have anything else to add, we still have a few more minutes.
I would just add, thank you as a friend, so I appreciate that you're listening. But I definitely think that WTS, I've seen the benefits whether it's meeting the commissioner, but also meeting the people that I get to team up with. I think we have an extraordinary team leading WTS. I think you'll find the same thing in CompTO. You'll find the same thing in ACEC. You'll find the same thing in ASHE. There's opportunities out there to be a part of those groups. And then it is an opportunity too. If you may not be in a leadership role at your career, you can be in a leadership role in that organization. CompTO, the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, that's another organization where, again, I said that was where the commissioner I met during a panel there. I think, and I do go back to make sure that you ask questions, because you may be surprised what people are involved in. Winnie, I know you're involved in a lot of things too with the environmental justice and the advocacy. So thank you for the question.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap it up. I am going to email everyone all of the talking points that we discussed today, all the links to all the acronyms of organizations. And as always, you know, our door is always open. We are on email 24/7. So if anyone has any questions.
Before we wrap up, Christina,
Although Roberta tells me not to check my email on the weekend.
But before we wrap up, I do want to say that of the 8 transportation management associations in New Jersey, 4 of them have women as their executive directors, which is wonderful. And that is Donna Allison of RideWise, Cheryl Kastronakis of Greater Mercer TMA, Rhonda Erkowitz of Cross County Connection, and Tara Shepard of Go Hunterdon. And on our staff, we've got, in addition to myself, we've got 3 really great women in transportation: Christina, Arlene, and Lynn. So we're all
led by the very best, Roberta.
No, okay. I can't do social media 24/7.
Well, my teenager has that on me.
We are working on some interesting projects. Arlene, who is our rideshare coordinator, is now putting together a program called Safety Town.
Mhm.
Lynn, who is our bookkeeper and also a program coordinator, manages our bike locker rental program. And also she's responsible for managing our Ticket to Work program, which provides bus tickets to people who are looking for jobs or who are just starting jobs. And Christina does everything. So there's a lot of room for women in transportation.
Everywhere, at all levels.
Zenobia, Commissioner, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I think I had an enjoyable morning. I hope you did too. Thank you.
I sure did.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks for
everyone.
having us.
Have a great rest of the day and happy International Women's Day.
Yes.
Same to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.